Good evening. My name is Alice Knapp, and I'm president of the Ferguson Library. And as I speak, I'm going to ask you to silence your phones or turn them off. We will be recording tonight. It is my pleasure to welcome you here to the Ferguson Library. This series started in 2012, and at the end of each year, we look at each other and we say, are we done exploring the topic of civility yet? And each year we say, no, we're still not quite there yet. So I'm very excited that you are here tonight for the first civility lecture of the season. But since this is a very interesting season, I wanted to let you know about a series of programs that we're doing this year in conjunction with the Aspen Institute. We are one of 7 libraries that have been selected by the Aspen Institute to do a public dialogue on what every American should know. And there's flyers about this series in the back. The penultimate program is on October 26th, when Mayor David Martin, Superintendent Earl Kim, Michael Hyman from the Chester Addison Community Center, and Wendy Scratt, President of the League of Women Voters, will have a panel discussion on what every American should know in this day and age to be an American. And after that will be followed with group conversation. And the idea is to crowdsource what we think in Stanford every American should know, a top 10 list of sorts. It's a very exciting program, and like I said, if you are very interested, there's a flyer in the back. We are But flipping back to civility, we are very pleased to be working with the Dylan Schneider Group, Hearst Media, to present this series. And with that, I'm going to introduce Joe Pisani from the Dylan Schneider Group.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out to this, the first talk of the season in the new Civility in America series. And I'm looking at this virtually unprecedented number. I guess we have a pretty impressive speaker tonight. Before I begin, remind you there's another talk next Friday. Mike Love of the Beach Boys will be here. But I think tonight will be a lot more intellectual and a lot more contentious. Over the past several years, I've run into a number of people who know Larry Kudlow, namely my boss, Bob Dylan Schneider, Bill Mitchells, I'm sure you're familiar with Mitchells of Westport, even Bishop Frank Caggiano of the Diocese of Bridgeport, and they're all unanimous in their assessment of Larry Kudlow. He's a decent human being and a man of integrity. Now, believe me, he's got a long CV, he's got a great resume, but in this day and age, you know as well as I do, those qualities of decency and integrity rank right at the top. But let me tell you a little bit about Larry. Lawrence Kudlow, as you know, is the host of the Larry Kudlow Show, which broadcasts on WABC Radio. He's a nationally syndicated columnist and CNBC's senior contributor and former host of CNBC's The Kudlow Report. He's a contributing editor of National Review magazine, as well as a columnist and economics editor for National Review Online. He's the author of the recently published JFK and the Reagan Revolution, A Secret History of American Prosperity. And looking out onto the audience, I see that virtually everybody has a copy. Previously, he had written American Abundance, The New Economic and Moral Prosperity. During President Reagan's first term, Mr. Kudlow was the Associate Director for Economics and Planning in the Office of Management and Budget, where he worked on the development of the administration's economic and budget policy. He's the recipient of many awards. I'll just name a few. The Extraordinary Commitment Award from St. Patrick's Church of Reading, Connecticut, the Bishop's Humanitarian Award from the Catholic Charities of Brooklyn, the Humanitarian Award from the Pregnancy Care Center of New Rochelle, and the Distinguished Communicator Award from the Brooklyn Diocese, along with the Ambassadors for Mission Award from the Pontifical Mission Societies of the United States. He's received an honorary degree from Monmouth University in New Jersey, and he's also on the board of directors of Hazelden in New York City. Mr. Kudlow is the CEO of Kudlow and Company, an economic research firm, and was formerly chief economist and senior managing director of Bear Stearns and Company. He started his professional career at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where he worked in open market operations and bank supervision. Mr. Kudlow was educated at the University of Rochester and Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
I appreciate that. It was a lovely introduction. It really reminds me of how old I am, but it's okay. It's good to be here. Thank you to the Dylan Schneider's dear friends, Bob and Jan, for preparing this or inviting me to speak. Thank you for your great turnout. Let me say a couple things. One is, this is absolutely not a political speech. I just want you to know that. We'll get around to that issue, but this is not a speech about politics. And I guess I was thinking about it in the write-up from the city. So the thought of me giving a civility speech anywhere 30 years ago or some such would have been outrageous. But things change, and we all change, and I've changed, and I'm glad of it. I want to begin with a quote from the Bible, from the Old Testament. Pretty good quote we found. I didn't find it. My wife found it. Genesis 13:1. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. Genesis 13:7. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. A strife. And Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife. I pray thee, between me and thee, let there be no strife, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. For we be brethren. That meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to me, and that's what I'm going to try to talk about. And I'm going to go in and find the second quote. Okay. My dear friend and colleague Susan Vargas here, she found this for me today. And I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs to set the stage. Economist and radio and TV commentator Larry Kudlow made an impassioned plea Saturday. This is late April. Made an impassioned plea Saturday for the conservatives to tamp down personal attacks and criticisms during a presidential race that has gouged deep divisions inside the GOP. On his radio show, former economics advisor to Ronald Reagan made his case for civility during a 12-minute commentary at the start of the program. This is a tough election. Conservatives are split. There's so many divisions, and some of the divisions have spilled over in very personal attacks and criticisms. My plea to my fellow conservatives and others is to please seek civility rather than acrimony. Nobody's perfect. I am not perfect. But I say this, I love discussions and debates, but when it spills over into the personal, hearts are broken. Thank you for indulging me in that. It is the way I feel. For one reason or another, I'm never quite sure why, I've been involved in public life for many, 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 many years. I guess about 4 decades. And some of it was as a Reagan official. Some of it really led to a broadcasting career. And the broadcasting career and a radio career. And I still get involved in some political advice, some policy advice. And I still go back to what was happening last spring rather. Conservatives, I'm going to speak to you liberals in a minute. But conservatives were at each other's throats. And there were personal disputes that broke my heart. I was involved in one of them. It just broke my heart. After 5 months or so, the dispute was solved by a lovely, beautiful letter from this person. Made me cry. Made me cry. You know, when you get into the personal, I always feel that game's never worth the candle. And what I want to say to you from the heart is, look, I love the discussion and the debate. I do. I've done it basically my whole life. I'm one big debater. But it ought to be about the substance and the issues and the facts, not about personal attacks. I'm going to get to this miserable election in a moment or two. I hate personal attacks. I mean that. I just despise it. Serves no purpose. You achieve nothing except deep divisions, hatred, and broken friendships. And right there at that spot, between my herdman and thy herdman, for we be brethren. It's just nicer. It's nicer. I looked it up in the dictionary. The Latin civitas, this is civility, the Latin civitas. It's about civilization. They mention culture. They mention good breeding. I was remembering as a kid, and I'm sure a lot of you out there relate to this, you know, we were taught as kids, you called somebody by Mr. and Mrs. You held doors for women, for ladies. You stood up when people came to your table. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot of good to that. And I've left out a lot of things about manners, but manners are very good. That's how people get along. Manners. During the years I did the television show, every night for about 15 years I did the Kudlow Report, 7 to 8 p.m. Actually, a lot of that period, 4 or 5 of those years, I was doing a show from 11 to 12 and came back. So we had a number of guests, and we always tried to have a liberal and a conservative whenever possible. I guess I was told it made for good TV. Okay, made for good TV. And some of these arguments were very good, very good. And others of them were awful. And when the name calling would start, we'd basically have the producers pull the plug. You know what? Mostly because I didn't like it. Now, it so happens, down through the years, being political and also doing this TV and radio stuff, I have met some wonderful people on the other side of the aisle. As I'm wont to say, some of my best friends are liberals. In fact, I come here in the spirit of true confession. In my deep, dark past, I was a Democrat for a long time. Ronald Reagan, my boss, was a Democrat. I've always believed that the best Republicans used to be Democrats. I'm going to talk about the book, JFK and Reagan, in a few moments. But again, I'd love to argue with you. I'd love to have factual discussions. I'd love to try to persuade you. Persuasion is a lost art in this country. Not to raise my voice, not for you to call me names or me to call you names. Believe me, I've been there in the public. It doesn't work, and it looks bad. It looks bad. I think that civility is tied closely to humility. Humility, as in, nobody is perfect. Nobody is all-knowing and smart on every issue. And also in the sense that we all have our flaws. We all have our flaws. I had a counselor years ago at a place in northern Minnesota who tried to teach me a couple of things. One of them was humility, and the other was civility. And And the third one was shut your mouth sometimes. So this guy was a genius. He used to always say to me, you know, you're going to go back out into the real world and you're going to resume your something job. So you're in a meeting. Don't always be the first person to speak. Hold back. Be the fourth person to speak. Let somebody else go out and put their case on the table and then react to it calmly and quietly. If you know much about my personal history, just lay it out real fast. I had a great career in Wall Street, great career in government, went back to Wall Street, and wound up becoming a really hopeless abuser of alcohol and cocaine. And as befits my public posture, the New York papers wrote quite a bit about it. And that's their job. I get it. And I went away to this place for quite some time, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months up in northern Minnesota, and learned a lot. I learned a lot about humility. I learned a lot about civility. I learned a lot about getting to know people and how important friendship is. And so when I bring it down to this political stuff, breaking a friendship is worse than anything. A good friendship. You know, you can cut taxes, you can raise taxes, you can bomb Syria, you can not bomb Syria, whatever. You can go to Obamacare, state care, private care. It's all a great discussion. The country will survive, but I don't want to break a personal relationship. I think about that a lot, and my heart was broken earlier this year as a result of that. So I really strive for civil disagreements. I really like it. You come prepared, you know, facts, we've done some reading, and you don't have to raise your voice. Raising your voice doesn't really work. It took me a while to figure that out. It's particularly true on the radio. It's also true on television. You think you're making a great point if you raise your voice. You're not. In fact, somebody's going to probably switch the channel. But there are, you know, facts and figures, and there are worthy debates. So I worked for a guy a while back named Ronald Reagan. And I would say I'm going to have a Democrat and a Republican in this particular part of the conversation. Reagan was a very civilized man. Now, those of you who didn't vote for him didn't agree with him, but I'll bet you liked him. I bet you did. And he approached politics. I was not his inner circle, but I spent some pretty good time with him in the budget. Very analytically. You know, make a couple points. This is what he believed in. And regarding his relations with his political opponents, i.e. Democrats, he welcomed them. In fact, his great tax cut bill in 1981 was done because we had lots of Democrats. Lots of them. I think something like 75 House Democrats voted for Reagan's tax cuts in 1981, and even more voted for the second round in 1986. Now, he'd bring them up to the White House and the Oval Office and give them the whole ride to Camp David. So there was a little salesmanship going on there. But he'd also be in meetings with 15 or 20 of them just talking quietly about his point of view and how he believed those tax cuts and other policies would be good for the country, which was not in great shape at that time. And I'm not going to tell you everything we did was great. I thought a lot of it was. You draw your own opinions. But he persuaded. When he gave speeches, he never attacked anybody personally, ever. He gave a speech to communicate a position, to try to persuade you. Most of the time, he was very successful. Not all the time. Most of the time. And he got along with people. So that's where I learned about politics, and that's really where I took a strong look at the idea of civility and persuasion, which unfortunately has become a lost art. The other one I want to talk about in this connection is the other hero of my book. The book is JFK and the Reagan Revolution. And just briefly, I'm not going to bore you with it, but it's an interesting history where Reagan was known as a supply sider and tax cutter and so forth. Actually, the first supply sider and tax cutter was the Democrat, John F. Kennedy. And Reagan borrowed his plan 20 years later and gave Kennedy all kinds of credit all the time. But when you go and we did the historiography on President Kennedy, and it was astonishing to me how similar it was to Reagan. Kennedy was obviously a charming man, a very good public speaker with a great sense of humor. He never raised his voice. He never lashed out at politicians. People called him all kinds of names, and he just took it and kept moving forward and gave some brilliant speeches before he was tragically assassinated. And he did what no one had done since the 1930s. America was in a stagnant economic period, and he cut tax rates across the board. He did that through persuasion. We have some of the speeches in our book, JFK and the Reagan Revolution, and I encourage you to have a quick look at it. It's a history book, really. It's not an economics book. Now, those were great reminders of what can be done in the name of civility. Most regrettably, the current election is the least civil I have seen in my lifetime. And I'm not going to say one or the other. I'm just going to say it is the least civil I have seen in my lifetime. It is doing this country no good at all. Because at the end of the day, voters will vote and they'll express their views. But at the end of the day, I think America needs leaders who, by example, will set a civil tone while having a disagreement. And the winners will try to move the ball by persuading you, not insulting you. It's the exact rerun of the Republican primaries. It's the worst TV that I ever had. You can't win an argument on the facts, figures, you can't persuade. What do? Personal attacks. Where did that come from? It's a horrible thing. Really. It speaks ill of our culture. It speaks ill of us. And I think we have to strive in each of our own ways to stop that. This is the most uncivil presidential I've ever seen. Way beyond anything. I'm not here to pick a horse. I'm not here to persuade you about a horse. I am here to give you my views as someone who has come to believe in civility as a way of life with manners and culture at the epicenter of our society. We somehow have to get back to that issue of civility. We must. We must, or we won't survive. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it. But when Bob Duenschneider asked me to speak on the subject, I was happy to speak on the subject. And I hope that I will persuade you that at the next dinner party, when one side is fighting with the other side, both sides will have a sense, and maybe you'll encourage them, to be calm and stay on the issues and not call names. I don't know where this name calling came from. It's the worst I've ever seen. You know, I do a lot of tweets and so forth, and people, they're not disagreeing with me. They're just calling me names. And once in a while, I tweet them back. I said, so, okay, you hate me, that's fine. What's your point? You know what I mean? I'm not running a popularity contest. I'm just trying to make the country better. If you don't believe my views, that's fine. But don't call me a name. Maybe it comes out of churches. Maybe it comes out of temples. Maybe it comes out of fellowships, families, schools. But we have to reignite the issue of civility. By itself, it is a very important goal for America. By itself. That's what I've come to believe. And I've been through it for a long time. Let me switch gears. I spent a lot of time in Wall Street. I had a couple turns in Wall Street before I went into the government and afterwards. And I look back on that period. I haven't been on the street in over 20 years. I look back on that period as a sober guy who reassesses his life. I've been clean and sober for 21 years now. And I look back on these things. And I've come to this point of view. When you go to work in the morning, I don't care what you are, doctor, lawyer, accountant, stockbroker, investment banker, I don't care, hedge fund, whatever, all the professions. When you come to work in the morning, you don't hang your ethics and morality at the door and leave them and forget about it. You don't. You keep them with you because you're dealing with other people and their lives. Now, I'm not going to end crime. I get that. But I want to raise awareness about this issue of not leaving your ethics. Don't check them at the door. Try to think about it during the day. There are always decisions. Some of them are good and some of them are not good. Try not to make the rogue decision. Try to make the helpful decision. Try not to make the harmful decision. Try to make the helpful decision. My own stomping ground was Wall Street. It has not been a great North Star. It has not done itself well. I'm not going to give a lecture on this. So many great people work in the financial industry. I mean that. Great people work in the financial. Unfortunately, because you had a few very rotten apples, the country now hates the financial industry. It's awful. It's awful. Well, that's too bad. But, you know, it could be any corporation. And people lie, cheat, and steal on almost anything. All I'm saying is if you believe in the golden rule, why don't you keep it with you? When you're on the phone to somebody, don't yell at them. Talk to them. Talk to them energetically. I'm fine with that. But don't go personal and don't go illegal, because most of us are pretty well educated. I'm going to bet in this crowd particularly, we know the difference between right and wrong. We've known it for a long time. We've known it since we were little kids. And so my plea to you, and I say this as a recovering alcoholic, you look back, life is short. Let's make the best of it each single day. Each day. Again, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. You can still favor higher taxes, and I can still favor lower taxes, but we can be brethren. I've seen it work. I'm not going to name names, but really, some brilliant liberals come on my shows on the radio and TV, and I have become great friends with them. Really. Arguing with a smile. It's okay. It's a ritual anyway. No one's going to solve anything. But at least understand what it is. So, you're nice enough to come out. I'm not going to keep you long. I want to sign some books for those of you who are interested. Happy to do it. Happy to honor your group. I want to finish with this point about civility. I have a theory. I'm not going to write another book. I just don't have it in me. I mean, you write them, but then you have to sell them, and oh my God. But my theory is an extension of my economic thinking. And I'll leave this to you to think about and discuss. First chapter of our book. I believe that the stagnant, weak economy of the past 15, 16 years, notice I'm covering Democrats and Republicans here. I believe that the fact that people haven't had wage increases in 15, 16 years, that job totals are down, that more people have left the labor force, that there are so many problems and poverty and out-of-wedlock births and fatherless families, and I could go down the whole laundry list. You know it as well as I do. my view, take it for what it's worth, is the reason America is cranky and unhappy and pointing fingers, Mexicans, you, this, China, trade, pointing fingers, blame. We're all playing it, not all of us, but we're playing the blame game nationally. Is because we're in a lousy mood because there is no real prosperity. Now, I'm an economist by training, and a lot of you may not agree, but here's my point. I saw it with my own eyes, as most of you did. The 60s were a very prosperous period. The 80s were a very prosperous period. The 90s were a very prosperous period. People didn't point fingers, didn't blame, didn't yell at each other, mostly. They were happy. I have a friend of mine, Arthur Brooks, who's the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a very good right-of-center think tank. Arthur's a sociologist by trade, and he's actually done massive statistical work. And he says that people who earn their income, earn it from a job, from a business, people who earn their income are happier than people who earn an income from the government. Now, that is not, I'm not making a statement. I believe in safety nets. I want to help the truly needy. I want to help, the last of our brethren. If you know me, you'll know that I believe that. But the point is, if the country is prospering, it is a happier country. I just don't think that's controversial. If a country is prospering, it becomes an open-minded country. It becomes an expansive, accessible country. And it becomes a country of goodwill. That is my experience, having been on this planet a whole bunch of decades. I've seen the good, and I've seen the bad. And I greatly prefer the good. And I still believe, the subtitle of our book, and one of them, is a story of bipartisan tax cuts. It's not the tax cut part that I want to dwell on with you as I close. It's the bipartisan part. I want leaders in business, in churches, in communities, in fellowships, on Wall Street, in Washington, in Hartford, whatever. I want them to sit down and do business with each other calmly, and civilly, so we can work this stuff out. This country has always done that. And I believe we can do it again. And somehow I think civility is going to play an important role. Thank you. You've been a great audience. I love questions. I love questions. I love disagreements. You'll see how civil I am. Yes, sir.
Next one.
Thanks.
No offense. I'm very offended that the press has picked up calling him all sorts of things, walking all over the veterans and Hillary spoke up this evening and the same thing. He was very disingenuous to veterans. You maybe talk about civility in the press, the way that people are treated.
And can you repeat the question for the people in the back?
I think the bottom line of that lovely question on a very important subject is it possible for the media to be civil? I think I'm capturing the essence of it. No. And you know what? I've been in and out of this so long down through the years. Not only have I given up trying, I don't even care. I don't even care. What matters is your own core beliefs, and what matters is your own core relationships. And, these newspapers are, far more wrong than they are right. But they're paid to cause trouble, and they do a good job of it. And as a former nightly broadcaster, I had a little bit of that disease myself. It's called ratings. It can drive you crazy. So it's like, if you do good and I do good, and you do good and you do good, good will come of it. I don't care what newspaper you're talking about. Good will come of it, because it starts at this level. That's my answer. I don't want to go into the specifics if you got. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. One down there. Then we'll get to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much for speaking what so many of us believe in our hearts. I have a very simple question. What can we, as private American citizens, do to bring civility back to politics?
It's a great question, ma'am. And that is how it's going to be changed. What can we do? We, everywhere. On the job, in the fellowships, in the hallways, on the vacations, in business. We. You're exactly right. So, I would suggest that we must consciously try to practice civility in our daily lives. It happens all the time. You know, the car in front of me is too darn slow. I have two options. Option A, start slamming the horn down. Option B, accept it. Now, before I had some help in therapy, I was option A. I just want you to understand that. But now I've come a long way, and I'm actually in option B most of the time. But I really think this too. I think relationships between people are so important. So important. And I think the idea of civility in relationships, you know, it could be a marriage, it could be a business, it could be voting for some elected official, whatever. I just think we have to think about it before we go at each other's throats. My experience, particularly in the last, I'll call it 2 years of electioneering, my experience is folks would rather go at your throat even if they've known you 30 years. That's not right. That can't be right. That's not America. It can't be. And it goes into these themes that I've tried to illuminate this evening. It just starts here, right in this room. You know, it's like do something for your neighbor. Civility has a lot to do with humility, too. I believe that. I don't think they're identical, but I believe they're related. And look, I was a kid who grew up in the 50s, who, like everybody, went nuts in the 60s, actually started working in the 70s, in the 80s, had my big problems and had to work through that and learn a better way of living. I just have great confidence that this country can do that. That's what I believe. I'm an optimist. I'm the most optimistic guy I'll ever meet. This is America. And I'd rather be here than anywhere else. And I don't care what political party you belong to. I hope you're the opposite political party of me, because I'll give you a big hug. And there's a lot of things we can talk about. Lots. They're more important. And that's what I want. That's all I'm asking for. I have learned it the hard way, if you will. I've been through it, and I've learned it the hard way. And like I say, there's a good way to live, and there's a bad way to live. And I'd much rather be in the good way to live. Others? Yes, sir.
Just to get away from civility just for 1 second, we were hoping somewhere along the way that comes November election, we might see your name on the Connecticut ballot. What happened along the way?
Besides sobering up. There are a lot of very kind people in this state who are urging me to run for Senate. I appreciate that. The pieces were in place. Some of the top political professionals in this country, people you're reading about running one of the campaigns, or people who are helping me on a voluntary basis. It was pretty heady stuff. People I've known for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. To be honest with you, sir, one of the things that turned me off, and we did a 6-month exploration, my wife and me, never make a decision without her, the acrimony in politics that we saw, I didn't like. I didn't like it. I wasn't afraid of not winning. My polls were good. I was just a rumor, and my polls were closing in on a potential opponent. That didn't bother me. Even raising money, I just didn't like what I saw and heard. And actually, the newspapers up here were pretty nice to me. I'm not going to go down that road. But it was very disruptive to our lives. That's what we felt. And at the end of the day, we made a decision not to do it. We wouldn't be able to have downtime for ourselves. And we have a home up in Reading, which we love. I would be missing 12-step meetings, which I cannot do. I'm being very honest with you. And I just didn't feel like arguing all day. I mean, I still want to argue all day. I argue for a living. Can I take a break at night? But I'm active, and I appreciate your thought. It was very kind. I've always been the, the policy advisor type, and sometimes you kind of have to know your boundaries and limits. That's what we chose. But you're very kind to raise that. Other questions? I'm not going anyplace. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Kudlow, I'd like to ask a question. Just get your opinions, I should say. I'll give you the names of 2 pairs of individuals. And if you would please just talk about their times, their relationships, and their legacies, okay? Because they were from different political parties and dealt with major issues during their times in office. First pair is Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Second pair, Barack Obama and John Boehner.
Geez, I wish you hadn't. I actually know a lot about both, but I don't want to get... Look, Reagan and O'Neill had a certain level of civility that was most welcome. I myself was part of that, and there are lots of Tip O'Neill people around who are friends of mine. They're on opposite sides, but they're friends of mine. In fact, one of them, who will remain nameless, but he has a very successful cable TV show every night, encouraged me not to run for the Senate, with good reasons. An old pal of mine. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Probably more is made of their friendship than there was, but they're 2 professional politicians who understood the way the world worked, and they did try the best they could to cooperate, honestly. They seldom succeeded, but that's politics. The history of the thing, which has been written and will be written again, Speaker O'Neill would, have a drink with Reagan. Reagan wasn't really a drinker, but anyway, he'd have his drink anytime. You'd always know when that was going on. Word would spread around the White House. And he'd go back downtown and somehow bump into a newspaper reporter and rip Reagan's guts out. Okay? So I didn't really like that. Now, I was a kid in those days, but I didn't like it. On the other hand, he who laughs last laughs best. Is that the expression? So in the most controversial beginning of Reagan's administration was his big tax cut. And we got it through the House with about 75 Democratic votes. So, having a glass of whiskey is not all bad. You win a few, you lose a few. Regarding Obama and Boehner, I was kind of close to that. It was not a good relationship, since you asked. It was not a healthy relationship, it was not a good relationship, and it was not a productive relationship. And that's all I want to say about it. This is, I'm not taking sides or anything here. I'm just saying, since you asked. And that happens. that happens. You know, to go back to my book, JFK had a way, I mean, the guy was a Democrat. Pretty much everybody was opposed to his tax cuts when he first unveiled them. Most prominently at a speech in December 1962 at the New York Economics Club. And what we did in our book is we quoted large parts of the speech, and we did side by side with large parts of Reagan's speeches, where Reagan is giving Kennedy credit. It's really quite remarkable. You know, Kennedy was doing this before Reagan was Reagan. You know, Kennedy was doing the Laffer curve before Laffer was Laffer, if you know anything about that stuff. The Southern Democrats were against it. A lot of Northern Democrats were against it. Unions were against it. Most of the Republican Party was against it. Remember, the GOP is usually identified today as the party of tax cutting. Republicans opposed it. Barry Goldwater voted against it and ran against it in 1964 with LBJ. So, I don't want to go too deep on this, but Kennedy had a way of talking to people and persuading them. He was, in my opinion, I mean, I grew up loving Kennedy and still do. My friend Art Laffer, I'm the same with this. I am a Kennedy Democrat and a Reagan Republican. That's the way I look at myself. Kennedy had a way of persuading with his charm and his humor. If you ever watch a Kennedy news conference, you'll see it. If you ever watch a Reagan news conference, same thing, humor. Self-deprecating humor. Where's that gone? Really? Where's that gone? So Kennedy formed alliances. And by the way, the sub-hero of that particular book is a Republican who was his Secretary of the Treasury, a very big job in any government. And he was a New York banker and Eisenhower's Undersecretary of State. His name was Douglas Dillon. In fact, Kennedy formed what amounted to a coalition government. His Secretary of Defense was a Republican. In those days, Robert McNamara. His National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy, was a Republican. Douglas Dillon, his Treasury Secretary, was a Republican. And I'll round out the fourth position. Secretary of State was Dean Rusk, who was neither. Rusk was one of those post-war guys, what do we call the wise men. When my friend, dear, good friend, George W. Bush, I don't agree with so much, but he was my personal friend. I was on that transition in the year 2000 and begged him to put a bunch of Democrats in the cabinet. Sometimes you win a few, sometimes you lose a few. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yourself is that you were born again.
Oh, yes.
I've been to several of these talks, and you're just wonderful. I really mean it. And I think it would be very good if you would even go to some of the schools or colleges and self-help groups and things.
Well, I've done some of that, and I would do more of it. I am born again. And I'm one of these guys that, for some reason, has had great success on the back nine, you know? And I'm 69 years old. I still play a very good game of singles tennis. I played in college, but it's not as easy now. The Lord has been very good to me. God has looked over my shoulder. I don't know why, but I try to repay it. And so like I said to the woman who asked the first question, I think, all he asks is that we live right and just, and then the rest of it works out. So I believe that. It's very corny stuff. I believe that. And I happen to be a churchgoer, but I don't even know if it's about going to church or temple or whatever, although, you know, I think that's a good thing. I believe he's looked after me, and I want to stay true to what I think are his will and his principles. And you are right. You are right. It's written all over me. I know that. Yes, sir.
Is civility and political correctness exactly the same thing? And if there is a difference, is there any public benefit to a speech which is civil but at the same time politically incorrect?
Which speech?
A hypothetical speech which is civil but at the same time politically incorrect.
You know, my view, just my opinion, you can be politically incorrect. Just don't jam it down somebody's throat. Don't make a fetish of it. I mean, look, the essence of America's democracy, the essence of our democracy is, you know, one person believes this, and another person believes this, and they are both free to speak about it. That is what America is all about. But when we get into trouble, and it is nowhere written in the Constitution that we have to call each other names and ruin relationships and families and insult and had ad hominem attacks. I miss that part of the Constitution. Now, I guess that's part of free speech. Some will say that, and you would be right, but I don't like it. I love to hear new opinions about stuff. And you know what? I should tell you something. Old codger that I am, I have actually changed my opinions on some things down through the years. It's rare, but I have actually changed. I have been persuaded, and then I've done some persuasion. It's a free country. We love a free country. Yes, sir.
I understand that much earlier, going back to your college days, you were a member of Students for a Democratic Society, and as you've just said, you were earlier a Democrat.
Anti-war Democrat.
Yeah. And obviously transitioned to being a conservative Republican. How did that happen?
Well, it took a long time, if that's any solace to you. I honestly don't know. The war ended, and I went to graduate school at Princeton, which taught me a little bit about free market economics. Not a ton, but some. I went to work at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, which is a fabulous place to spend 3 years training, which is what I did. I was actually Paul Volcker's secretary. It was the last job I had at the New York Fed. I also was a staffer, part-time and full-time, for Democrat Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a hero of mine. And that was the last Democrat I worked for. And there were a lot of Moynihan alumni in the Reagan administration. A lot of it was about foreign policy. I mean, you know, Pat was a real hawk. Pat had worked for Nixon, for Ford. He had worked for Kennedy. And he worked for Reagan. In fact, he worked for Bush. I wrote him a note. I mean, I used to testify in front. It was very funny. He was a big shot on the Senate Finance Committee, and we got along great together. He called me Kudlow. That was it. And people said, that's good. You know, at least he remembered something. So time passes. Pat's out of politics. And George Bush wins a crazy election in the year 2000. And Bush creates a committee, which is good, a commission to take a look at the possibility of Social Security reform and entitlement reform. And I wrote a column in the National Review praising my former boss, Moynihan, and suggesting that, you know what, he should come in and become George Bush's domestic policy advisor, top assistant for policy. And I got a great note from him. Dear Kudlow, been there, done that. No more. So, you know, you evolve. That's the way life works. Now, I think I registered Republican, and I don't think it was 80. I think it was 81. So however many years that is, 35, 6 years, whatever. It's a long time. On a long time. On the other hand, I'm not going to tell you who I always voted for president. And just for you who want to get on my case, nobody praised Bill Clinton's economics when he was working with the Republican Congress. Nobody praised him more than I did. And what's so great about that is Bill and I worked together. We each ran a congressional district for an anti-Vietnam Democrat running for the Senate named Joe Duffy. I ran Hartford, took a leave of absence from Princeton. Bill ran New Haven, took a leave of absence from Yale Law School. And I thought many of his domestic policies were quite good. I see him in New York every now and then. Yes, sir.
Current gridlock in Washington. The current gridlock in Washington, would you say it's more a function of animosity and lack of civility, or philosophy and policy?
I actually would go the former. I would go the former. How about that? Somebody asked a question, a good question, about Obama and Boehner. And I'm just going to tell this. This is not a partisan story. But they made a deal in 2011. I believe it was late in the year. The numbers are in place. Boehner knew he was going to get his head handed to him and probably overturned as Republican Speaker in his caucus. But he made a deal with numbers in place, and the president changed the numbers significantly at the last moment and went on, White House press conference, and it all fell apart. The moral of that story is that that kind of thing has got to stop. And Republicans are not clean on this. Believe me, they're not clean. And A, a handshake is a deal, and a deal is a deal. B, America needs help. I think that's a fair assessment. We may disagree precisely, but we need some help. So I would say to you, here, in the spirit of our book, what we need today, I'm going to use tax cuts because that's what our book was about. We need bipartisan tax cuts to get the economy moving again. A rising tide lifts all boats. We need a bipartisan deal on health care. We need a bipartisan deal on spending and deficits and budgets. We need a bipartisan deal to destroy ISIS and related terrorist groups who hate us. And this is the part that probably hurts me more because I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I follow it. America used to be united, right? Democrats and Republicans. John F. Kennedy was a World War II hero who hated communism. Ronald Reagan hated communism. The head of the AFL-CIO hated communism. It's gone. But these people are threatening us. So we need to get honest and get a group of statespeople together. I know who they are. I know who they are in the Democratic Party. They've been retired for a bit, but that doesn't mean they couldn't come back if we set up an apparatus. So I'm going to go back to this. I think civility, calmness, humility, the things we've been discussing tonight, can put that together. And by the by, Reagan, who made a lot of deals in the White House, made a lot of deals. He ran the motion picture, Screen Actors Guild 5 times, had the only successful walkout against the movie moguls. Reagan made deals, and he said, some of them are better than others, most of them not bad. And then he'd always say, depending on where you saw him, he had two sayings that I've always, and I've written a lot about the need for deals. Just give me a half a loaf now, and I'll get the other half later. And then he had another one that I heard every now and then. If you and I agree on 80% and we disagree on 20%, we are friends and allies. And I can't speak for the Democrats, but for the Republicans, we've gone through a period where if you disagree 20%, holy hell, bloody personal war breaks out. And that's got to stop. That's got to stop. I don't know enough about the Democratic Party. I have opinions, but I'm not going to share them. But I know in our party. And like I said, to quote my friend, mentor, Art Laffer, distinguished economist, if you don't know him, I am a Kennedy Democrat and a Reagan Republican. That's what I'm going to do. That's why I should have said to you right at the top. Details don't matter. That's who I am. And both of them were good people. Both of them are great leaders. Thank you. Bob Dylan Schneider.
Larry, everyone, I think, would like to know your opinion. Can Trump win, or is it over?
Well, it's not over. I don't know about the winning. I mean, I have no idea who's going to win. Seriously, I have no idea. And it's not over because we still have whatever we have, 40 days left or 39 days left. So I'm going to completely dodge your question. Yeah, hang on. You had one. I don't mind the second one, but I don't want to knock out a first one. All right, sir, you're back.
Wait, well, hold it. Yes.
As I look back on the various elections I've witnessed in my lifetime, regardless of what side of the aisle I think anyone was on, you could say, this is the person that I really wish would be president, and here are the 4 or 5 others that would be fine with me if it's one of them. Now, one of the things that you mentioned about the need for civility in Washington comes from bench strength, which comes from the need to understand and get along. But one of the things I think that's a problem for that, for people to get elected and stick around, the fact that these campaigns are, in essence, ongoing marketing campaigns. I don't know about others in this room, but it's been 15 months. I'm just tired. Get it over and done with. I mean, people are already talking about Ryan being a candidate in 2020. So how do we get back to the notion of building bench strength of people who are indeed civil when in the environment they're under such scrutiny and such pressures because of things that are not civil? You know, how do we get back to that? How do we grow that?
I don't have a wonderful, brilliant answer. I'll note that my impression of both political. I was in New Hampshire covering it for CNBC. I was in Iowa covering it for CNBC. I made the rounds. I think that America had election fatigue last winter. All right. Second point is probably a more serious point. Let me tell you, there are a lot of very good House and Senate members in both parties. I mean that. And I don't want to compare them to the, in the good old days. I don't know about the good old days, but smart. My own congresswoman in the old silk stocking in Manhattan, Carolyn Maloney, calls me all the time on economic matters. I love that. I love that. And a few other Democrats. And you've got smart people in the Senate, and you've got smart people in the House, and they will emerge. They will emerge. And who knows? I don't want to tempt fate or history. Ronald Reagan was not Ronald Reagan before he became Ronald Reagan. And I dare say JFK was not JFK before he became JFK. We just don't know. Harry Truman came in, wound up, at least on foreign policy, he was a fabulous president. Is that fair? So we just don't know. You just got to have faith. You got to have faith in freedom and democracy. That's another one of my arguments down through the years. And you got to have faith that the country will come together, hopefully with a little more civility, and we will figure out how to grow the economy at 4%, not 2%, and we'll figure out how to destroy our current enemies, which want to destroy us. We'll figure it out. This is America. I actually believe that. This is America. I don't think I'm going to do any better than that. You're a great group. I love the turnout. I love your questions. And, I just, please think a little bit about what we're talking about tonight. Good luck. Godspeed. God bless.
Beach Boys next Friday. This looks like a Beach Boys crowd.
You were tremendous.
Is it okay?
He's
You
great.
sure?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
I mean, Bob was
The
ecstatic.
place filled up, I noticed, even
We
though.
have not, the last time I've seen it this full was Senator Olympia Snowe.
Who was a friend of mine,
Yeah.
by the way. Good friend of mine.
Huge fan. I miss you on the cover.